Going back to that day in 2021, you said this was a clinic that was inside like an office building?
Yes, it's a multi-tenant building. So there was dentist office, massage therapist, and all kinds of other tenants in the building, along with the abortion clinic, which was Care From Clinic.
And then the activists were out in the hallway?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And you were out in the hallway as well?
I was. Yep.
What happened that particular day? Did the police show up?
Sure. So the first thing is the security guard walks down the hall and tells us we need to leave. And and Matt, let me go back just a second to set it up a little bit. You know, the trespassing is what the charge was that day for the folks that did get arrested. It was not me. I did not get arrested that day. But in order to be trespassed off a property, the building owner has to tell you you're not welcome. And specifically the property, when it's a multi-tenant dwelling, and the expectation is that all the public is welcome because of all the tenants that are in the building. So there's the legal framework for where I was operating in that day of having the building manager, building owner, or operator actually telling us we weren't welcome. So
did that happen?
It did not, actually, ironically. And you see that in some of the interviews after the fact with the police officers going back to the clinic, asking specifically if they had the authority to trespass people, if the building owner was aware, and different things like that in the post-arrest interviews that took place. But basically what happened is we came into the hallway, the security guard came down, told us to leave. He said, we're gonna call the police. So they called the police. The first couple officers showed up and told us to go out on the sidewalk. You can protest on the sidewalk. And the folks that were going to risk arrest that day in a rescue fashion. We could talk about that if you want, what a rescue is versus sidewalk counseling and different things. But I pointed out to the officer that if they left their position there in the hallway, then that clinic was going to open up and little baby boys and girls were going to die that day. And they didn't feel morally they could walk away from such a situation. And so that's one element of the day. And like I said, the others were the sidewalk counselors and then the people in the hallway just to pray and to worship and just to lend spiritual support, to the day as well.
And which of those categories were you specifically?
Yeah, I had sidewalk counseling teams there that I had trained. Mm-hmm. I was not doing the counseling specifically. I was interacting, I was certainly praying and singing and participating in the worship aspect of it. And then primarily my role developed that day, just kind of serendipitously, is when I realized that the police didn't really understand what was going on. And, think back, this was a time of BLM, Antifa, and all the violence going on. And my main concern was they're going to think we're some kind of violent group and they're going to come against my sidewalk counselors and start, being heavy-handed and dangerous and violent in response. And so I went to talk to them just to assure them that we were a peaceful group, there was no violence, nobody was going to resist anything. That's how the conversation started with them and developed from there.
Now you mentioned rescue, and there's a distinction between that and sidewalk counseling, so what is that distinction?
Sure. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, a tactic developed from the church, and it was a multi-denominational effort and understanding of dealing with the dilemma of if you really believe these unborn children are humans and little boys and girls, then we should act like it. And what model do we have and how can we protect them and actually stand in the gap and actually do something rather than just talking about it. And what was developed is what's traditionally known as a sit-in in America, right? All protest groups sit in and block something, or they do, to protest the, whatever it may be, Greenpeace or, the Jerusalem, Gaza stuff that's going on now. We see this happening. So it's just basically normal American sit-in protest type things, but with a spiritual additional element is that the main heart of that matter in the rescue movement that we saw rise in, and just so I don't forget, there were about 77,000 Christians arrested in America, making the pro-life movement one of the largest civil disobedient movements in the nation. But the spiritual element was not just, hey, we're here to physically block the doors and shut it down. It was, how do we respond in a Christ-like manner? And what do we see in the model of Christ is that he interposed between us and the one that was coming to destroy our soul. He laid down his own life so that we might have life. And so that's what the church was trying to do, is to sit down at the door and say, look, I'm willing to go to jail. I believe that baby that you're carrying is valuable enough as a human being that I'm willing to go to jail for the sake of you and that child.
So the rescue / sit-in, as you say.
Sure.
And were you doing the sit-in yourself personally?
Back in the 90s, I participated in a couple. In this situation, not at all. And my 11th child is 3 years old next month. And so she was due like 5 days after this event. So I was very cautious of all the lines to say in, so I didn't want to be in jail and risk missing our 11th child being born. So
11 children. What are the age ranges?
From 29 down to 3.
You have multiples in there, twins?
No twins, all the hard way, all the old-fashioned way.
One at a time. So the police show up, and at what point do they start arresting people?
So they came in, you had the first group that showed up, and they came and talked, and like I said, I went back and talked with them. Seeing that there were so many people, they called in, there's procedures they follow, right? So if there's a large gathering and a protest or something, they have policies internally that they follow. So they called out the rest of the task force and whoever else was supposed to be there, including the negotiators. And so once the negotiators were on site, we had with us one of the gentlemen that was leading the rescue aspect of it is a former Las Vegas police officer, Chet Gallagher, a great man, a man that loves God. He's been participating in pro-life work is, 30 years or so now. So he was going to speak to the police officers because of his background. He actually was confronted with this in his role as a police officer when they were doing a rescue in Las Vegas. And instead of arresting the Christians, basically, he gave up his job and participated with them. And he felt convicted that that was the right thing to do. As a police officer, he tried to report that there was a murder in progress. There's a life at danger here. We need to do something. And the higher command wasn't buying it, so he did the thing that he felt like he needed to do there. So he and I, since I had already talked with the police earlier, I went with him to just kind of ride his shirt tail and listen to the conversation. Like I said, we both had kind of different interests there that day. Primarily one interest, obviously saving children, but different avenues of what we were planning on doing and what our role was. And so we ended up talking with the negotiators and police officers, had great conversations with some Christian civil magistrates and talked about Romans 13 and the role of the officers and all that. So it was a good discussion with them. So through that process, though, we determined and let them know that not everybody was willing to be arrested, that some were waiting to be trespassed properly to leave, and that others were willing to risk arrest, and that they would not resist, that, it would be peaceful. And so we kind of negotiated and worked with the police through their processes to figure out how the arrest would be made and how that would go down.
How many did they arrest that day?
We ended up with, I think it was 8 adults and 4 children. And the children weren't actually arrested. They were cited and released back to their parents.
And the charge was trespassing?
The charge was, criminal trespass, typically a Class B misdemeanor. And those were dismissed at Wilson County.
And why were you not arrested then?
Because I obeyed the police. When they said it's time to leave, I left.
All right. So that was 2021, and that's, as far as you know, sort of the end of it at that point?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We went to the jail and sang hymns and prayed for the people that were in jail through the weekend, waiting to get processed out. And they went back to the court date.
How long until it was dismissed?
It varies. Because different ones showed up at different times. They didn't all have a mass trial like we did in the federal court.
And then the federal government gets involved
In a big way. Yeah.
At what point did you know that the federal government was looking at your case?
Yeah. So 7:15 on a Wednesday morning in October, when my house started rattling and I heard the words, "Open up, FBI." And I don't know about the average American, but that's not something that's in my common thought process at any time in the day, let alone at 7:15 in the morning. So they showed up to arrest me, and we had a big, that's been covered a lot, but there was 4 armed guards, armed FBI agents in tactical gear, fully armed, long guns, sidearms, vest, everything. 3 of my children were outside in the side yard. Like I said, they were about to go to school, and so they were heading out to the car, and they were being held. I didn't know at the time, but they were being held out to the side by another agent, with a long gun, and wouldn't let them come back into the house. And then, processing everything that goes through one's head in a situation like that.
Prior to this, you didn't even hear any rumblings that the
Nothing.
federal government was looking into this?
I tell you that, Matt, the only rumbling I heard was when they arrested Mark Houck in Pennsylvania, and I realized what a sham that was from what little bit I knew of it. I told my daughter, I think the week before, I said, with the stuff we've been involved in our whole life, being out on the sidewalks and stuff, the day and age is coming in our country where they could come for us. And it was more of a warning to my children coming up in the culture they're going to be living in and what's setting expectations. I had no idea how, a week later that would be true for us.
How did your wife and kids react in the moment?
Yeah, my wife was awesome. She was sent to get a sweater for me, and was cognitive enough to grab her phone, quick enough to on her feet to grab it and come back. And it's so funny, the attitude of those agents were cocky and arrogant. The guy was taunting my wife. She never got told what they were arresting me for. I didn't get told until we were in the car and I was locked in the car. So they're taunting her. She's asking, why are you arresting? And the agent literally is sitting there doing this little head bob. You want to know? You really want to know? And she came out with the camera, and it's like, well, ma'am, I've been trying to tell you. Day and night. And unfortunately, that you don't have that on video, but that was the attitude at least one of the agents had. And there's 4 of them. They're all different. They have different lives to live and all that. But
what's going through your head in that moment?
yeah, well, when I pulled the curtains back and saw the guns pointed at me, the very first thing is the safety of my family. And you go through all the scenarios, of somebody showing up at your door that seeks to do harm to your family, and what do you do? And quickly process that it had to be politically motivated. I'm a local business owner. I've been on the same farm for 15 years, owned the same business for 11 years. So I knew there wasn't anything violent or anything. It had to be political of some sort. And so I reasoned that the safest thing to do is just put myself in their hands and surrender myself for the sake of my family. And that was, 1,000 thoughts in about 3 milliseconds kind of processing.
You said that only once you were in the car they told you what you're being arrested for. What did they say?
Because I asked for a warrant at some point, and under whose authority you're arresting me or whatever. And, the cocky guy's point says a little Velcro badge. This is all the identification you get, kind of thing. But fortunately, I didn't ride back to Nashville with him. I rode with 2 of the other agents. And he said, here's the warrant if you want to see it. And they pulled it up on a laptop. And of course, I didn't have my glasses or anything else. All I could see is face in bold letters. So I'm like, okay, well, it's pro-life related. So at that point, I had at least an understanding that it was pro-life related. I still had no idea it was that particular event or anything.
See, I'm pretty naive. I thought that when you get arrested, they have to tell you why.
Yeah.
Is that not a is that not a thing?
When the guys have guns and an attitude and don't want to tell you, who's going to make them? And that's really what it comes down to.
Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.